It's been a while since we've had a generative work podcast, but today I've been reflecting about purpose, having had the wonderful experience of being invited to join the Purpose Sages Summit by Anna Maria Aristide Sabal. And that may be up as a different podcast, or we may talk about it elsewhere. But I've got the great pleasure today to be joined by my new business partner, Beth King. Woo! And Beth joining generative work. And we thought, as we have been discussing purpose and it's been in the air, we would capture our conversation about what is the purpose of generative work, and really a bit more about how our live process of really tapping into purpose, our origins, what it means to us, why it matters, what matters to us about the work we're doing in generative work. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you very much. Awesome to be here in this conversation.
Awesome to have you here. And I'm just noticing it looks like it's dark outside. It's not dark, it's just the British weather, isn't it? It looks like we're doing this at 10 o'clock at night. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But there we are, in the dingy grey January sludge. Here we are discussing the lovely bright topic of purpose. So, Beth, can you remember when the notion of purpose first kind of came around, when you first became kind of aware of, because it's a real buzzword now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually can't remember when I was aware of it, because I think it's been really core to who I've been right from the word go. I mean, I think that I grew up with a set of parents who, in one respect, were not pushy, but very encouraging of me thinking about what I might do and be in the world. And also, on the other hand, particularly my mum, on really helping me think about who I wanted to be, what was important to me, rather than what I would achieve, what's important to me. So actually, it was something that I worked with from a really, really early age. And I think if I think about those two expressions, my purpose, what am I going to achieve, versus my purpose of how do I really want to feel? What impact do I want to have in the world? I definitely resonate more with the latter. So for me, purpose isn't about, I'm going to be this or I'm going to achieve that. Purpose is about, when I wake up 20 years from now, how do I want to be feeling? What do I want to have done? What good do I want to have had in the world? That's kind of how I resonate with it now.
I really like that. I think it's really good to kind of separate out the in and the outer, because I think sometimes people think about their purpose as, oh my God, what is it I'm going to accomplish? And it can be a little bit overwhelming. And actually, I really like that inner framing about what matters, what matters to me. And in organizational terms, we have all the, mission, vision, values, purpose, and sometimes they're used kind of interchangeably. And I think it's more helpful to speak in ordinary language, isn't it? What is it that matters to me? And what is it? What's the contribution I'd like to make? And then maybe there is a bit about the impact. What's the impact I'd like to have? What would I like to see my work do in the world? And somehow that all kind of belongs in purpose for me.
Yeah, 100%. And having worked with clients over the years and been on the side of processes to find mission and vision, I mean, in your experience, how often do companies end up with some kind of mission or vision statement, which really is just an expression of a strategy? It doesn't actually talk about impact and what the end user, or whether it's an internal mission and vision for employees, or whether it's our mission and vision for our product or whatever. It never really gets to the heart of why. And I think, I don't know if you come across Simon Sinek's work around the power of why. We can have a good debate about how well he articulates it and whether we agree with everything within it. But that simple idea of talk about your why, rather than talk about what or how, for me is so resonant. And I don't think many of us, either as individuals or organizations or teams, really get to the real why. What's that thing that gets you up in the morning, that really makes you want to make that difference, and what would it be?
Yeah. And I think there's another distinction there, and that's something that I was talking about with Anna Maria at the purpose stages. There's a difference between our individual sense of purpose and our organizational purpose. Even if we're the person that set up the company, even if we're running the company, there's a difference. And sometimes I think they get a bit smudged together, and that's not really helpful.
I think that's really important distinction, particularly for smaller organizations or
Yeah,
founder-led organizations.
yeah,
And we both know, right, that as those organizations grow, part of the challenge we see is decoupling founder purpose from actual organizational purpose. Having said that, I do think there is a really important and intimate link between personal purpose and organizational purpose, because if they're not congruent, then
mm,
why would you really bring your full self into the workplace? And you can again see that in big organizations where nobody is really connected to this high, lofty, probably not really a purpose statement that doesn't resonate with anybody, and therefore what's really driving their work. So I think the link between, it's really important to distinct, but to link them together and to make sure there's congruence and a flow and energy between the two is really important. And I think one of the things I found so wonderful about collaborating with you and this kind of new articulation of generative work that we're stepping into is that I've still got my own personal purpose, what I'm trying to do, and yet what is emerging between us and in generative work is so in alignment with what feels important to me and my personal mission and purpose, that actually it feels like a delight to get up and be in work every day and to do the things we're doing, even when they're difficult. I
yeah.
know we're doing it.
And that's the thing. I love it. We're framing purpose as an energizer as well as a unifier.
Yeah.
That why does give us that reason to get up. And I think, let's get into our personal sense of that in a sec. But I think also that idea of aligning our personal and organizational purposes, it's great if we can get it, but also it might be that your work doesn't entirely fulfill, not us, but one's work might not entirely fill one's personal purpose, but you can have a side hustle, or you could volunteer, or there could be some creative project. And I think as long as there's a spread, as long as your personal purpose is getting covered off, you don't necessarily need all of that in your work, just enough of it for it to be meaningful.
And I think that's the word enough, because
Mm,
actually you could go to the other extreme and say my personal purpose is fulfilled through my family, through the charity work I do, through other organizations I do. But unless there is at least some smidgen of congruence between
yeah,
your career, your profession, and your personal purpose, I've seen a lot of people get really, really stuck because of
yeah,
that not being fulfilled. And I think as an individual, it's really important that we do what we can to align them. But I
yeah,
think the more so from an organizational perspective, having that discourse and that conversation with your employees to understand what drives them and what's important for them, and feeding that into the organization is the only way that you're going to have a successful company.
yeah, absolutely. And it's that idea of there's momentum to it as well, isn't it? There's that energy, but there's also momentum. There's a sense of direction. And I do think there is this unifier. It's like, well, we're all pulling towards this goal together. And we might have our different expressions about how we do that. We can all have different places in the organization,
Yeah.
different needs we serve within it, but we're working at something together. And I think that quality of working with others is also really important.
100%. And you look at all the research that's out there over the last 10 or 15 years around engagement. One of
Mm,
my real passions is how do you really create engagement in organization? And there's three core drivers that come out of it. One is connection. So do I feel connected to the other human beings around me and myself? One of them is availability. So that would talk to am I psychologically, physically able to be in this space? Kind of links a bit to well-being. But the most important driver is meaning. That actually, to really be engaged, I need a sense of meaning and fulfillment in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. God, I feel like that could be a whole other topic for another day, because you know, we could really go off on that one. That would be fantastic. So let's bookmark that for another day. But thinking about this for our own organization, because we are a very small organization, but of course there is that sort of micro macro. What we're doing reflects what we're supporting other organizations to do. And so I just thought it'd be great for us to capture a little bit. And it's still live. This is still evolving for us around, you know, in this new iteration of generative work, what is our shared purpose? But let's go back a little bit. And you said that you kind of grew up with quite a strong sense of your personal purpose. And I know that that also evolves. It certainly has for me. What's your best current estimation of what that is for you right now?
So before I get there, I think I'm going to share something that feels relevant to me then trying to articulate my purpose, which is I've been playing with this idea about what's more important, our felt sense of a purpose or the purpose elevator pitch, the thing that somebody says, well, why are you doing this? And then you can reel off this really beautiful thing that everyone go, ah, yes, I get you and I'm on board with you. And I think personally, but also again, as an organization, there's something quite interesting around when we put words to something, we reduce it. So I
Yeah.
have this really deep felt sense of what my purpose is. When I then try to articulate it, it becomes a bit reductionist. It comes a bit small. So I'm not saying I'm not going to give it a go. I will give it a go in a minute. But I just think it's quite interesting the process we're going through now, and any other organization would be going through, which is trying to distill the essence of a purpose in a way that is simply and easily communicable.
Yeah.
And I love our journey. I think you and I, over the last 2 or 3 months, have spent a lot of time. We know in our guts, our heart,
Yeah.
we've got a purpose that is very closely aligned. What we're trying to do now is articulate it in a way that is succinct and we can stick on a website or we can put in a nice little podcast. And that's going to take, it's going to take multiple iterations. And even whatever we express, it's like a butterfly. We'll pin it down and it will feel a bit dead. And then we'll keep feeding it and breathing more life into it and evolving it as we go. So I just think there's that really interesting dichotomy between us trying to articulate it and yet also having that deep felt sense about what's behind it.
I think that, I mean, let's be waffly. Let's be in the territory of.
Exactly.
And it's interesting when you say that, because obviously in systemic work, one of the things that we do is create a marker for purpose and invite people to stand on it and get an embodied sense of what it's like. And what I like about that, it is that sort of energetic touch point that it gives you, that when something comes along, you can kind of sense, oh, I think this is something to do with my purpose, because it feels like that. It is very much associated with a feeling. So given all of that,
What would
what's
it
the
be?
feeling that, well, what do you know about that feeling of being on purpose, working with your personal purpose?
I think my purpose has evolved and always remained the same. So a little bit of background. I mentioned my parents before. I grew up with a mother who was very much into healing work. She was a sound therapist, worked very much with, she would, what you would in old language call very left brain, very creative, didn't like planning anything, was very much an emergence and human connection. And I had a father who was a scientist through and through. If he was 100 years ago, he would say the earth was flat. Anything that he cannot measure or precisely scientifically prove does not exist. And I grew up in this environment of both. So I'm kind of a scientist and a spiritualist. I am pragmatic. and process orientated and yet love emergence and no plan. So I've kind of had these two dichotomies in me at all times. And even when I was in my early teens, I had the sense of being a bridge
Mm,
between two worlds and two ways of being. And that's kind of stayed incredibly true to me as I've gone through. And the way I'd probably articulate it now, having worked in big corporates as a strategy consultant through IBM, so the big pieces of work, through to moving much more into psychology, into systemic work, into emergence. My purpose, really, if I was to put it down into one sentence, is to be a bridge. Is to
mhm,
be a bridge between the old way of working and new ways of working. So for me, that idea of being a bridge is really translated into who I am today. So my purpose is to be a bridge, but also to be a bridge to integrate the best of the old ways of working and everything that we know in organizations. And in fact, any of our practices are still really helpful and wonderful, we want to preserve, but bridge that into more of a conscious way of being, bridge that more into systemic perspectives, bridge that more into actually what does this new world ask of us. And
yeah.
I think my purpose is also where it has evolved, has been particularly over the last 5 or so years, as I've really started to connect in with what the emerging conditions in the world is asking of us. So the
Mm,
increasing complexity, the challenge, that the mess and muddle that everybody is facing, some of the bigger socioeconomic challenges we've got, climate, energy, economy, it's getting more and more messy and muddly. And I'm feeling my purpose, my felt sense of purpose is helping people, individuals, but also organizations really step up into that space and find a new way of being. And I did think with my psychology, I could have gone very much into an individual perspective. I
mm.
love sitting with individual leaders or human beings and doing personal development. But actually, my purpose feels much more aligned to the organizational aspects, because in this new crazy complex world, forget governments, forget NGOs, forget kind of the big macro organizations, businesses have a huge impact to play within moving society forward. They're where people spend, at least 60-70% of their day-to-day lives within. They're the ones that do actually drive a lot of our politics and our economies.
Yeah.
And if we can help businesses work in new ways and find these new ways forward and integrate the old and the new, then I think we can really actually make a bigger impact on the world.
So it's so lovely to hear you. And it's so interesting because I'll say a little bit more about my personal sense of purpose, which is a little bit different for yours, but the crossover of the bit that we want to work on together, it's like, oh my, I mean, you could have described my heart word for word. So it's so lovely, isn't it? And as you say, this is something that we've been exploring, well, for quite some time now in kind of growing together and bringing our work together in this way, that I really hear you around organizations are the site of change that can bring about the biggest impact, I think, both inwards on people and outwards onto the world. So that's, I share that interest
Beautifully
and
put.
love.
Beautifully put.
And I think I've always had a sense of work isn't working. Modern life isn't working. Most of the stuff we do is insane. Why are we still doing it? And I think it's interesting, you were talking about being a bridge, and just the word that came to me listening to is I feel like my calling is to be a beacon. It's something a little bit different, but just like calling into the new and saying, I think I've been a bit of a maverick and I struggle with that a little bit. But now I'm kind of really embracing that kind of quality in me, that I am an edge dweller. I like to be a pioneer. I like to say, no, stuff that. Let's just forget about all of that. Let's start again. Let's redesign. Let's use our imagination and dream into being what we really want out there. And so I love between us. I think we've got a really good set of kind of skills and drivers about me wanting to sort of kick things over a bit and build the new, and you being the bridge over into that new. I just love what that brings for us when we come together and work with people.
100%. And it reminds me of a model I came across 6 months ago. And I know, Sarah, you and I have spoken a bit about it, but that idea of the old either coming to an end and ending well, or actually this kind of process of eye-opening, of seeing, okay, we're at the top of the hill and the hill's starting to dip, but looking up and seeing the beacon on the other side of there's a different way of doing this. And we so need the beacon. We need
Yeah,
the beacon of this is some different ways of being. And we need the people who are piloting and trialing these words, often in these smaller purpose-driven organizations. The entrepreneurial organizations are trying these things out. So we need the beacon. We also
yeah,
need people who can open the eyes of to actually look up at what.
more of the people. Yeah,
And then you kind of, it's not even a midwife. Midwife implies birth of new. It's kind of I can't even think of the phrase I'd want to use for it, but it is something along the lines of supporting that transition across
yeah,
and going lockstep with
yeah,
people and giving them the confidence and the skills and resources and capacity to make that step. And we
yeah,
need all of that. And I love that you and I well, I know that you can do the eye-opening in midwifery, and I know I can be a beacon, but I'm probably, with my background and experience, more focused here, and vice
yeah.
versa with you. And that, I think, brings a real magic to what we can do together.
Yeah, and when we've, talked about this in the past, it's like the space between us just then really opens up. And, it's a great space for clients of all kinds of descriptions to play in. And it's something that we've been talking about, who is our work for? And actually, that feels like it's really expanding because it's really anyone who wants to explore a slightly new way of doing things that does lead us into these, conscious systemic generativity or whatever language we put on it, this different way of doing good business that actually has a positive impact inwards into the organization and outwards into the world. And, however you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, doesn't matter so much, does it? It's not like we're working with a particular size of organization or a particular sector. It's more that heartfelt connection to I really want to try and do something different.
It's an intent, right? It's about,
Yeah,
do we know that what we're doing is a bit broken? Do we
yeah,
know that we've tried all the traditional ways, and I say this with love because I was a traditional corporate consultant in the earlier parts of my career. I've been there in the system. We do the same thing, we rebadge it with different words, but we're trying to do the same thing over and over again. So actually, I think the people we're starting to work with are those that are going, hang on a minute, actually there is something different here. I've no
yeah,
idea what it looks like, but I'm
yeah,
willing to go on the journey and have a look for it.
yeah,
And I'm back to the idea that anyone's got the answers about how you do that. I have come across some consultants who'll go, do this and do this, and the world will be different. If I hear that, I run a mile from them because the reality is no one knows how to do this
no
yet.
one knows. We're making this shit up on the fly,
100%. And yet there are pockets of
Yeah,
people that have a sense about what has and hasn't worked. And
yeah,
they might be in the small entrepreneurial organizations, they may be in the bigger organizations, but there's so much we can learn
yeah,
from one another if we can actually bring those different minds together and really get curious about what new looks like. There is a lot of good we can do quite quickly.
yeah. And I think what helps us in that sort of, yeah, we're very free, we're innovating, we're creating, we don't know what the answer is, but there are some core principles that can guide us. And I think that's really what we're bringing, as well as lots of experimentation in that space. And I know we're going to come on and talk a bit more about what is generative work, what is a generative organization, because there's some core principles there around paying attention to the whole and looking for flow, finding resources. There's lots of different ways that we can talk about it. But let's come on and talk about that perhaps the next time we get the chance to get together, because that feels like that's the next step, isn't it? But
Really,
even
go on,
I'm
sorry.
just thinking about our time, so we're going to need to wrap this up in a few minutes. So let's just have a go at what would be our best guess today of our purpose for generative work. What would we say about it?
What's going through my mind is our core statements around we're here to help organizations in the mess and the muddle, to play with the tensions and the paradoxes, to see things new and fresh, to build themselves up for the future and the impact that they can have.
Yeah,
And that as a mission statement feels really, really strong. For me, what I think we still really want to get to the nub of and articulate is if that almost feels still a little bit about the how we're going to do it. This is
yeah,
going to help organizations. For me, where I still think we've got something to articulate is why. Why are we helping organizations do those things? What's the real thing? And for me, we might have got a bit close to it earlier on, which is, I'm going to throw some words out. We believe that organizations are the site upon
yeah,
which real change can happen.
yeah.
We believe that real change needs to happen for the world, for organizations, for the people within it. And so I feel our purpose is about creating the environment, the climate, the conditions for people, organizations, and therefore the world to thrive.
Absolutely. And I think it's that whole picture that what we're talking about a lot is that we can't just have purpose or just have profit. We can't have sustainable growth and then let go of the well-being. We're looking for a much more complex, connected, interrelated web of benefits, actually, that the organization can help to produce. And I do think we're there to kind of amplify the impact of organizations to be able to achieve that. And also, I do think it is a bit around the how, because I do find that people come to us when they've got a sense of like, well, that's where I want to get to, but I don't want to do it in the same old way. So there's a willingness, but we help them with the how. Here's how you get there when you've got that intent and the willingness to try something new.
But then to go back into the purpose, why we do that is
Yeah,
because we are wishing to support those that are looking to do something new on behalf of the world.
yeah,
And we're looking to be mentors, to be support, to play our role
yeah.
within piloting, creating this new way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, it is amplifying the purpose of the organizations that we work with. And that means that we want to believe in that purpose. Otherwise we're not going to get engaged to really want to help them to kind of grow and have this greater impact. So yeah, I think we're getting there. And
Again,
I love this
lots,
conversation.
lots more to refine and work on. But yeah, I think for me, if I reflect on our conversation, a couple of themes really come up. One is the balance between personal purpose and
Yeah,
shared organizational purpose, and the magic personally of us kind of coming together. I think there's something really interesting about it's hard to get to the why, the purpose, without also talking about how we do it. They are
yeah,
intimately linked. They are important to distinguish between the two, but they weave together, particularly in the type of work that we do. And I'm also struck by this. If we could just, hopefully we're going to put this podcast, if there's a bit on our website that says our purpose, we
mm,
can just give this. This is much more authentic and rich than any simple statement or small paragraph we're going to come up with.
we can do that. We can do
So,
what we like.
pattern of having one-liner purpose statements. Let's do
Exactly. They need to, yeah, they need some room to breathe and they need some room to grow and evolve. So we can definitely walk our talk in that sense. Well, Beth, thank you very much for today. It's lovely
riffing with you.
to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to our next one.